Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining us for today's Lunch and Learn, a research seminar on the New South Wales Drug Court evaluation called Positive Outcomes for Common Clients Across Justice and Community Services. I'm Jessica Stewart. I'm the Executive Director of Family and Community Insights Analysis and Research, also known as FACSIAR, in the New South Wales Department of Communities and Services. So before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that wherever we're joining today from across New South Wales, we are all living and working on Aboriginal land that was never ceded. I'd personally like to acknowledge the Bidjigal people, who are the owners and First Nations people of the area where I have the privilege of joining from today, and I pay my respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to our Aboriginal colleagues joining us today. So I would also like to warmly welcome all of our webinar participants. We have had a great response for this webinar with over 1,000 people registered. So thank you so much for your interest today and recognising the importance of this topic. So today's Lunch and Learn will focus on how to address the needs of common clients across justice and community services to effectively tackle complex vulnerabilities and promote rehabilitation. We'll firstly be hearing from Jackie Fitzgerald, the Executive Director of the Bureau of Crime Statistics and Research, also known as BOCSAR, who will discuss how the consolidation of critical services under the Department of Communities and Justice has encouraged a holistic view of client interactions across various human services. Jackie will provide insights into the overlapping areas of child protection, out-of-home care, criminal victimisation, offending custody, public housing and homelessness, highlighting that many families in New South Wales receive a high volume of services each year that need to be better coordinated and really consider the experiences and needs of families. Following this, we'll have a presentation from Professor Don Weatherburn from NDRC, the National Drug and Alcohol Research Centre at UNSW, who will present the findings on the recent New South Wales Drug Court evaluation. So as always, please put any questions for our speakers in the chat. We'll do our best to respond to those during the presentations, or absolutely we'll come to these in the Q&A session at the end, or post the webinar. We can also provide further resources on our FACSIAR webpage. And this session is being recorded, and we will post this out on our FACSIAR webpage about a week after today, and we will send you an email with the link. So before we begin, I'd just like to quickly introduce our presenters for this afternoon. Jackie Fitzgerald is the the Executive Director of BOCSAR within the New South Wales Department of Communities and Justice, and has worked in the field of criminology for more than 25 years. In recent years, her work has focused on the intractable issue of Aboriginal overrepresentation in the justice system, long and short-term changes in young people's participation in crime, the lingering impact of the pandemic on offending behaviour, and how the criminal justice system responds to crime and domestic and sexual violence.
Sounds like an activity. An accessory.
I think we just need everybody on mute, please. And Professor Don Weatherburn is a professor at the National Drug and Alcohol Research Centre and was formerly Executive Director of BOCSAR. Don has published immensely on a wide range of topics, including sentencing, criminal justice administration, drug law enforcement, alcohol-related violence, harm reduction and program evaluation. Don is the recipient of a Public Service Medal and is a member of the Academy of Social Science in Australia. Thank you so much, Jackie and Don, and please go ahead, Jackie.
Thanks so much, Jess. And yeah, we're definitely among friends here, because I had the pleasure of working with Don for hundreds of years when Don was at BOCSAR, and now I have the pleasure of working with Jess very closely every day in the Department of Communities and Justice. So it's like a bit of a reunion here. So I'm going to be talking about some data opportunities that have arisen through the merger of the Department of FACS back in 2019 and my former department, the Department of Justice. And I'm not actually going to give the definitive answer to how we can resolve those problems for people who are intersecting DCJ systems, but I'm going to try and give you a little window into some of the data insights that are available, and this is just one potential view of our clients, and really you could come at this in a whole range of different ways. So I am a data person, and I'm going to be showing data, and I'm assuming that you guys have jumped on, given up your lunchtime to hear some data news, and you're open to that. But just stick with me. I've tried to make it engaging. Hopefully I deliver on that. You tell me in the chat if it works or not. Open to feedback. So the loose guiding principle of this talk is to look at what we can see about people who start to offend in their early adulthood, and really what information is visible to DCJ through our various data sources that can illuminate and guide policy interventions on that. Okay, let me just do my take control thing. Here we go. Right. So that's working okay, Jess? Yes, good. Okay, so this is the data that we have available to us in DCJ. You can see that here, when DCJ was created back in 2019, we brought together under one umbrella public housing, homelessness services, child protection, including out-of-home care, courts and custody, and also DV, the responsibility for responding to domestic violence and also sexual violence. So that really presented an opportunity to bring the data from those various siloed areas under one, to look at the intersection of those clients in all of those services, to see what overlap there is and how we could coordinate services so that we're not treating those people in isolation. We're actually looking at the totality of those individuals. So Jess, FACSIAR and BOCSAR work together to build that data set, and it sits within DCJ, and it's available to us for policy purposes, budget planning purposes. It's also available to our frontline people, but it actually traditionally hasn't really been shared externally. I think we're kind of focusing on our internal responsibilities initially, but it is really illuminating what we can see about our clients through this data set. And it can tell us a lot of really interesting things. So it can see how many people in custody have, for instance, children in out-of-home care. We can see that that's about 20% or so. We can see how many people coming out of custody engage with homelessness services. We can see that's about 18%. We can see how many victims of domestic violence go on to become perpetrators of domestic violence, and a whole range of different intersections. But what I'm going to talk about here is what we can see about young people who are in our service system, and what we can see about the harms that those young people experience as they move into adulthood. Sajeev, can I just ask you a question? Sorry. Can you tell me if the animation is working or if I have got all my slides up?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yeah, the circles, both circles have come up.
It's Sajeev knows this, but if the animation doesn't work, it's going to be a pretty short and uninteresting presentation, but we'll just persevere. So what we're looking at here is, if we imagine this rectangular box is everybody born in New South Wales in 2000. That's 115,000 people in New South Wales. And what we can see through this linked data is that about 1 in 4 of those people had a child protection contact while they were under 18. So these people are, obviously they're 24, 25 at the moment. But if we look just at their engagement with DCJ prior to their transition into adulthood, a staggering really 1 in 4 had a child protection contact, and that might include out-of-home care. More commonly, it includes a report of a risk of significant harm report. We also can see that about 5% of young people have a justice contact, and that could be a court referral. It could also be a caution or a youth justice conference. We've excluded warnings, so the most lenient justice intervention there. And so that's quite a small proportion of that total population. And this is kind of, I guess, how we traditionally looked at these people. So the child protection people look at those individuals and justice people look at those individuals. But really the question is how much of this is, what's the intersection between these two people? So this next slide shows the intersection there. We've got about 22% of the total population have only a child protection contact. 3% have both a child protection contact and a justice contact. And there's also this 2% of the total birth cohort who had no justice contacts, who only had justice contact and were not known to child protection. And then there's the majority of people born in 2000 who 73%, so 3/4, are not known to DCJ at all. They've had no contacts in either the child protection or the justice system prior to the age of 18. So that's really, guys, pointing towards these individuals as being those ones that are most interacting or have the highest interaction with DCJ. And we also can look at this in a slightly different direction. Let me go there. On the left-hand side, we've got those young people who are involved, known to child protection. And we can see that 12% of those individuals had a justice contact as a child. So the majority of people known to child protection actually don't have any justice involvement prior in their youth. So that's also illuminating in terms of how we should respond, and I guess it points to the level of intervention required for these people. Most of these young people with child protection won't be in contact with the justice system. But actually, if we look at those individuals who do have a justice contact, we can see that nearly 2/3 actually do have a child protection contact. So while child protection doesn't necessarily lead to justice contact, actually, when we look at those young people involved in the justice system, the rate of child protection contacts is much higher. So if we can just remember, I'm going to invite you to remember these colours here, and we're going to continue that as we explore what we can see about these young people. So we've got this child protection contact, this kind of bluish colour, and the yellow is a justice contact. We're going to stay with our young people who are our birth cohort, actually. So if you can just imagine that, once again, we've got our 115,000 young people who were born in 2000. And here, now we're showing those young people as dots. So that is actually 1,000 dots. And let's just imagine that reflects our 115,000 people born in 2000. And we've also stratified these in terms of their contact with DCJ up to the age of 18. So if you remember, we had our justice contacts. Is this yellow group. They've got justice contact but no child protection contact. This is our most the group that's most engaged with the justice system, this orange group. So they're justice contacts and child protection contacts. That's about 3% of the total birth cohort. 2% had only justice contacts, and we've got 22% of the total have a child protection contact but not a justice contact. And then there's the majority who are not known to DCJ at all. So the question we ask ourselves now is what happens as we move into adulthood? So actually, over a person's lifetime, the kind of peak offending is your late adolescence, early adulthood. And what does this early contact with a department like DCJ tell us about the likelihood of moving into the adult justice system? And so I'll just move in through that. Oops, sorry, people jumped ahead. Okay, so we know that of our 115,000 people, about 6% will offend in that kind of a young adult window, so between 18 and 23. And but actually the rate of offending is very different depending on that early interaction with DCJ. So these young people who, the 3% of our cohort who had both child protection and a justice contact as a young person, half of those people will offend as adults, and that actually accounts for about a quarter of our young adult offending cohort. So even though we're talking about a very small sliver of those people born in 2000, it does contribute a significant proportion of our offenders as our adult offenders. When we look at these young people who had no child protection contacts, but they did offend as young people, their offending is lower as adults. So only a quarter of those young people offended as early in their young adulthood, suggesting that marker of child protection contact is an indicator of risk of future offending. We take our young people known to the child protection system who didn't offend as young people, only 6% of them offended as adults. But actually, because it's a sizable volume, it does still contribute to a significant chunk of the young adult offenders. And then we look at our young people who were never known to DCJ. So actually only 4% of those people offend as adults. But because it's such a sizable chunk of the population, it still really is nearly half of our young adult offenders. So there's a few ways you could look at that, but really this early contact with DCJ is certainly a significant marker of future involvement. And if we're looking to reduce adult offending or youth offending, really there's probably an opportunity to engage with these young people for meaningful change. We know that they are coming into our systems, they're known to our department. So this is really an invitation to look at how we're engaging with those people to try to change that trajectory that we can see is very harmful into young adulthood. So I'm just going to quickly pick up this group. So this is our young people who were known to child protection, who offended as young people, but also offended into their early adulthood, and just see what further information we can see from our linked data about those young people. So if we start at the bottom here, we've got 1,700 young people who this is their situation. They have had youth justice, adult justice, and child protection contacts. And we can see here some of those markers of the harms that those young people have experienced prior to by the age of 25. The out-of-home care contact is very significant. So about a quarter have been in out-of-home care. Domestic violence experience, about half of that cohort are known to police as a victim of domestic violence. A huge 60% have accessed homelessness services throughout their life. Public housing residence is quite common. But we can also see the interactions of not just that young person, but their siblings and also their parents. Actually, the siblings look quite similar to the young person themselves, which is probably what you'd expect. But we can see that there certainly is an indication of intergenerational exposure to similar harms. We've got about 1 in 10 have parents of these young people have themselves been in out-of-home care, also known to child protection very commonly. 40% have been in custody, which is a huge proportion, and the vast majority have had court exposure themselves as offenders. Domestic violence also very common amongst that group. So what we're really showing here is how you can develop this much richer picture of the clients that are in DCJ by linking this data. And really this is now available to policy people to develop programs to respond to this. And also the fact that we're able to now look at that intergenerational contact and harm is really, I guess, providing a complex view of our clients that was really not available to us, either when we were siloed, but even within those silos, it was very difficult to see parent-child continuity with contact with DCJ. And this is something we hear a lot, of course, particularly for our Aboriginal clients, those the intergenerational nature of contact with our department being so harmful, and now we're really able to shine a light on that. That's it from me. Now I'm going to throw over to Don Weatherburn, who's going to talk to us about the drug court. I think you can take control, Don.
Yep. I've taken control, but here we are. Great. Everybody see that?
Yeah.
Okay. So I would just want to begin by acknowledging my co-investigators in this, Sarah Rahman, Suzanne Poynton, and Michael Farrell. I might be the one doing the talking this afternoon, but it was very much a team effort in doing all this work. So a bit of background for those of you who are not familiar with drug courts. They emerged in the US in the 1980s in response to an epidemic of drug-related crime, which led to overcrowded courts and prisons. They assume that if an offender's crime is drug-related, reducing their drug use should reduce their involvement in crime, which is a reasonable assumption. Most of you will know that participants in the drug court program are subjected to very close monitoring, especially in the early phases of their stay on the program, and that includes frequent weekly meetings with the drug court team and frequent testing for drug use. In the US and in Australia, progress is usually rewarded. I don't know what the rewards are these days, but at least it consists of a round of applause, which is quite moving if you're actually sitting in the drug court. And relapse or non-compliance with program conditions typically attracts a sanction, such as a short stay in prison. Many of you will know that the available evidence suggests that drug courts are effective in reducing reoffending, and I've listed some of the major studies that have demonstrated that there. We've also done a couple of evaluations of the New South Wales Drug Court program previously, but those evaluations are now somewhat dated because they all involved the original 2001 cohort of offenders. And back then, heroin was the major drug of choice among offenders who are committing drug-related crime. These days, it's more a case of methamphetamine. And so it's somewhat of an open question whether or not the drug court is as effective as it was. And that's one of the reasons we did this study. But the main reason for doing the study was that ideally you'd hope that if you manage to sort someone's drug problems out, you might also expect to see improvements in other areas as well, less likely to go to jail, better health, and better outcomes for child welfare. And that's really the main focus of this study. So to be eligible for the drug court, you have to satisfy all those conditions. I won't read them all out here. But key ones include residing in the specified catchment area and being referred by a court in the catchment area, being 18 years of age, and of course being willing to participate. People who've been convicted of drug trafficking offences under Part 2, Division 2, Part 2 of the Drug Misuse and Trafficking Act are not allowed on the drug court, and you can't get onto the drug court program if you're suffering from a mental condition that would prevent or restrict participation in the program. So what we wanted to do was to find out whether, compared with those who are eligible for the drug court program but not placed on it, are drug court participants less likely to reoffend? Are they less likely to be imprisoned? Are they less likely to require emergency medical treatment or hospitalisation, whether for an alcohol or other drug-related reason, or indeed for any reason? And lastly, are the children of drug court participants less likely to be the subject of a risk of serious harm report, a ROSH report, or placed in out-of-home care? So the aims are reasonably straightforward. The design is also straightforward. We want to create treatment and control groups that are matched on factors likely to affect the outcome. And speaking broadly, the controls we had, or the matching we did, was based on demographics, prior and current criminal justice contact, prior child welfare contact, and prior health contact. I'll go later on into the precise details of the controls, but for the moment, that's basically how we tried to match them. What we then did was, of course, compare differences between the treatment and control groups in criminal justice, health, and child protection outcomes. It's important to note that this is what's called an ITT design. What that means, it's intention to treat. And in practical terms, that means that a person is included in the treatment group regardless of whether they complete treatment. Some people find that a strange decision, But the aim here is to always ensure that we have a valid counterfactual. In other words, we want a comparison group that is identical to the treatment group, except that they didn't get treatment. If you start pulling people out of the treatment group because they didn't complete treatment, you immediately imbalance the two groups so that they're not alike, and any difference you find could be attributable to those differences that aren't related to treatment. So ethics approval came in around about November 2022, and the structure of the data set is that we took all those who had been referred to the drug court in Parramatta between the 1st of January 2016 and the 31st of December 2020, which gave us roughly 2,985 people, well, not roughly, exactly. And we took that spine of people who'd gone to the drug court and we connected the data from them to the BOCSAR information on their criminal history, the health department or health ministry information on emergency department and hospital admissions, and thanks to FACSIAR, the ROSH reports and out-of-home placements of children of those drug court and control group participants. So there are the outcomes we're looking at specifically. So from New South Wales Health, we get any ED admission within 5 years of referral to the drug court. We also get any drug-related ED admission within 5 years of referral. Same sort of outcomes for hospital admissions within 5 years of referral and drug-related hospital admissions. From FACSIAR, we get any ROSH report within 5 years of referral or any out-of-home care placement of children within 5 years of referral. From BOCSAR, we get whether they were reconvicted within 12 or 24 months following referral and whether they were imprisoned for the instigating offence. So that's where we're looking to see improvements if possible. So the covariates in more detail were age, sex and Indigenous status. I don't think I need to read all of those out. As you can see, it's a comprehensive group of controls from demographic to criminal justice factors to child protection factors and to health. And it's important to point out that no study previously in Australia and very few overseas have included controls for child protection and health outcomes. And it's those sorts of controls which are absolutely essential to making credible judgments about the impact of the program on child protection and health. Okay, so you may want to have a look at the profile of people we're talking about. So I've just got a few graphs here which show you that 80.7% of the participants in the study were male. Fair spread of ages, although the modal age group is 27 to 33. Age of first contact is depressing, as it always is with these things. About 1 in 5 kids had their first contact between the ages of 10 and 14. And as Jackie would have pointed out, many of those might have had some contact with the welfare system. I'm not suggesting for a second that the welfare system causes that. It's a reflection of the same underlying process. Most of them had their first contact as a juvenile, and a diminishing number had their first contact when they were older. In terms of Indigenous representation, 33%, a third of them are Aboriginal, which of course is far more than the Aboriginal percentage in the general population. And in terms of the criminal justice profile, you can see that disturbingly 83% of them had either 6 or more than 6 prior convictions. A third of them had a prior conviction for violent offence, and about 66% of them had a prior conviction for theft offence, and about half or a bit more than half of them had been in prison before. In terms of the welfare background of these people, about 18.5% of them had had a prior ROSH report against one or more of their children, and just under 10% had had one or more of their children placed in out-of-home care. As far as health's concerned, about 15% of them had been in ED in the previous 5 years, about the same percentage for a drug-related ED admission. About a third, or a bit under a third, had been admitted to hospital for any reason in the preceding 5 years, and about the same percentage of them had been admitted to hospital for a drug-related problem. So pretty much they're going to hospital or they're going to an ED for drug-related problems well before they actually get to the drug court program. Now, this is about the busiest slide you'll encounter, and I want to reassure you right now, there are no equations in this presentation. On the left-hand side of each of these two panels, you've got all the variables and their values in the study. In the second column, you can see the percentage of people in the control group for each of those characteristics and the treatment group. So to explain, looking at sex, for example, you can see that 11.7% of the women were in the control group, 88% of the women were in the treatment group. Looking at the male comparison, 36% of the males were in the control group, 63% were in the treatment group. I've highlighted that because that's one of the two significant differences between treatment and control before we do any matching. So it's quite remarkable how similar the two groups are even before you get to match them. The other significant difference relates to offence seriousness. If you have a look at the not serious category there, the bit that I've highlighted, you can see that 24% of those who committed a less serious offence were in the control group, 75% of them were in the treatment group. Compare that with, for example, the very serious group. You can see 37.8% of the very serious offences were dealt with by the control group and a smaller percentage in the treatment group. So, I mean, to summarise, basically, there's some tendency to the drug court to select people who are women and who have committed less serious offences. You don't need to worry about the rest of the tables, although if you want to scan through them, by all means do. There's no significant difference between them. So the next step is to actually match these groups to ensure that they are identical, at least in terms of all measured respects. And I'll get to that in a second. I've just tricked myself. I've got a little story to tell before I get to that part. You need to know that there are two ways into the drug court. The first one is when there are more eligible referrals than there are places on the drug court. When that happens, when there are more people competing for a place, the court selects applicants by what I call a nearly random ballot. I know statisticians would be appalled at the phrase nearly random, but I'll explain what I mean by nearly random in a minute. We call that cohort the balloted cohort. It consists of 420 treatment people and 197 control group. So how did we end up getting those people in that ballot? Well, here's a little flow chart. If you start where it says start, always a good spot. If a person's judged to be eligible and willing to go on the drug court program, they're referred to the drug court. If there are more offenders than there are places, follow the arrows. Then what happens is the drug court holds a ballot. If the person wins the ballot, they go across to the drug court who confirm whether they're eligible for the drug court. And if the answer to that question is yes, they're admitted to the drug court program. If they bomb out on the ballot, they go to a conventional court and enter the control group. Okay, that's one way to get into the drug court, and you end up with 197, as I say, in the control group, obviously less than the number that are in the treatment group. The second way is when the number of places is equal to or greater than the number of eligible referrals. When that happens, when there's an abundance of places, the drug court doesn't hold a ballot, and we call that the non-balloted cohort. And that produces a much bigger sample of people for treatment, 1,366 in treatment, and again, just the 197. And the way this happens is just following this flow chart again. You can see if you go across, there are more offenders than places. If the answer to that question is no, then they slip down again. They have to be confirmed eligible, and they go straight onto the drug court program. If they are not deemed as eligible, they get dealt with by a conventional court, but they do not enter the control group. So we're stuck with a control group of 197 and a much bigger treatment group. All right, what do we do with that situation? Well, since all subjects go through the confirmation of their eligibility, it means we can't treat the study as a randomized control trial. And that's what I meant when I said nearly random. It would have been random, much to my delight, had the drug court not decided to conduct eligibility hearings after the randomization. But that's another story. What it means is that we now, to create a valid counterfactual, we have to match the treatment and control group. So we combine the balloted and non-balloted cohorts, and we match them using a technique called entropy matching. Do not worry, I'm not going to explain what entropy matching is, although you're welcome to write to me and I'll explain it. So we're now looking at the results of the matching, and what we've got down the left-hand side is each variable and each of its values. And what we're going to compute is the standardized bias before matching and after matching. So the standardized bias is the mean difference between the treatment group and the control group for any one of the variables divided by the standard deviation. That just normalizes the whole thing. If none of what I've just said makes any sense, just have a look at the two columns. You can see before matching, there are quite a few differences between the groups, some positive, some negative. After matching, there's almost no difference or no measurable difference. They're all below 0.001. Those are not p-values. That's the standardized difference after matching. So we've satisfied ourselves that at least in terms of the things we controlled for, the two groups are identical. The only difference between them is that one of them got treatment and the other one didn't. So at last we get to the results. So the only thing you need to know about odds ratios, which is on the ordinate there, is that if they are below 1, and if the whiskers on each dot don't overlap with 1, then the drug court is doing better than the control group. Just let that sink in. So if the odds ratio is less than 1 and the confidence interval, which is that wing, is not overlapping with 1, the drug court is doing better. Okay, well, so the good news is that it's doing better in terms of reoffending after 12 months. It's doing better in terms of reoffending after 24 months. They are less likely to end up in prison. They all look less likely across all the outcomes, but unfortunately, some of them overlap with, some of the confidence intervals overlap with 1. So we don't see any significant effect for ED admissions, whether any or drug related. Well, there is a borderline effect for drug related. In fact, my horizontal bar has slipped a bit high there. What it should show is right on the top end of the confidence interval for admission, ED admissions involving drugs. I'll come back to that. But the really nice thing, I think, from FACSIAR's standpoint, is that if you're a member of the drug court, you're less likely to have your children placed in out-of-home care, which is a surprising result. I didn't expect it, but we certainly see that effect there. All right. Now, I know odds ratios are horrible things, and I don't much like them, so I thought I'd convert this into something everybody understands. These are the 4 significant results, and I'm comparing the percentages in the treatment and control groups for each of these 4 outcomes. So looking at the top left, you can see that 40% of the treatment group reoffended within 12 months compared with 57% of the control group. Moving across to the right, you can see 59% of the treatment group reoffended after 24 months compared with 72% of the control group. Now moving down to the bottom left, you can see 59% of the treatment group were imprisoned at finalisation compared with 72% of the control group. And last but certainly not least, 4.8% of the treatment group had one or more of their children taken into out-of-home care compared with 9.7% of the control group. Those are good outcomes. All right, let's just summarise all that. So compared with those who are eligible for the drug court but who are not placed on it, look, I don't think I'll tell you the percentage point changes. It's only statisticians love those things. Let's just go down to the relative terms. So basically what you're looking at is that the drug court has managed to produce a 30% lower risk of reoffending at 12 months, an 18% lower risk of reoffending at 24 months, an 18% lower risk of imprisonment, and a whopping 51% lower risk of a child being placed in out-of-home care. So what do we make of all that? Well, the results on reoffending and imprisonment are certainly consistent with past research on the drug court, which is very encouraging given the big changes in drug use that have happened over the last 20 years. We see a really encouraging result in terms of out-of-home care. I'm not sure why we don't see any Roche report effect, but a real possibility is a statistical power problem. We have a very small comparison group, and the incidence of people being receiving a Roche report is quite low. The other possibility, which the FACSIAR brought to my attention, is that the drug court may actually be addressing some of the risk factors for risk of serious harm. So it may be that the drug court's the reason you're seeing that benefit. But in terms of health outcomes, I know the health people were disappointed with this. Personally, I think it's a power problem. The reason I say that is if you look across those odds ratios I showed you, all of them are below 1. All of them nominally favour the drug court group. The problem is that with a small sample size in the control group, we've got confidence intervals are wider than we would have liked. But it's also possible because the treatment encourages people to seek further treatment. We saw a similar result with the merit evaluation where numbers weren't a problem. So there are real issues there about whether we've got the best possible measure of health outcomes. There are, as there always are, limitations with the study. I've said many times that we've got insufficient number of control subjects. That creates a power problem. It's possible, as I mentioned, that we've got some problems with our measurement of health status. And because this is a matching study, we can't say, as we would have in a randomized controlled trial, that we'd controlled for everything, regardless of whether we explicitly did so or not. There's always possible some factor that we didn't measure is responsible for the results that we see. And that's it from me.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Don, and thank you, Jackie, for really interesting and terrific presentations. And it's really terrific to see the outcomes of the drug court evaluation, particularly around out-of-home care entries for those children. Lots of claps coming up. Jackie, thank you for being so proactive in the chat. It looks like you've covered most of those. There are a couple in there. So just firstly from Hazel, how can these risk markers such as parental profiles be used for proactive support and preventive interventions for children and young people?
I'm happy to have a go at that. So I think really one of the elements of Jess and my job is to try to get data in front of policy people. And that's, I guess, a continual challenge and a continual something that we think about all the time.
Opportunity.
Yeah, it's an opportunity. So we really, I think, and there's no one particular data view and there's no one particular format. So you actually kind of having the same pushing data to policy people continually in various formats, and sometimes it's the presentation and sometimes it's, you know, a couple of data points and sometimes it's a long form report, but you know, I think a challenge for us as the data people is to make that data available in a format that works for policy people, so to make it engaging, to be available when they're ready for data, that you're kind of ready to put it in their hot little hands. And it's really, I think where it works best is it really is a partnership, and there's a kind of we're involved in those policy discussions from the beginning, and there's a kind of an iterative discussion where new questions emerge and we're able to answer, and that might mean that they go in a particular direction. And you can see that some, I mean, to be frank, some policy teams are more mature in that conversation than others, and some will never proceed unless they have that pipeline with the data, and some are kind of still building that connection. So I think there's no one way that it can work, but being ready to answer the kind of real questions is that's a benefit for us. Like, that's where we can offer the most value, really, rather than us driving the agenda. It really should be a collaboration between the policy folks and us. I don't know if Jess, you have views on that?
I agree with you, and I think the value of having linked data like this is that you can see more broadly the interactions between, you know, if we provide better housing and homelessness support, for example, and the interplay with child protection and out-of-home care, and same here with better support around drug and alcohol issues. It's not just impacting on justice outcomes, but really supporting families. And I think that's been the big shift over the last few years as DCJ, is that we're really starting to look at families rather than individuals being serviced by housing services, homelessness services, justice, courts, child protection, out-of-home care, all individually. We can really start to see this richer picture. And as Jackie said, it's our job to get that information and data and evidence in front of decision makers and help it inform policy and program design and service delivery as much as we can. There's another question around disability data. So, Jackie, does the data go as far as breaking down whether children and young people have a disability? I know this is an area that we're all really focusing more on, but is this something that can be accessed by external agencies?
That question. So disability is something we're trying to work on. There's such a an emerging need and desire for that information. We're also working in a privacy landscape that makes working with disability information tricky, actually, but we're trying to make sure we give people what they policy guys want with regards to disability, but also meeting our data security and governance obligations. So it's not going to be ready by the end of the financial year, I can assure you of that, but it's something that we are continuing to pursue. In terms of access to this data outside of DCJ, that's I guess a next step for us. So the data set has been developed primarily to meet the internal needs, but I know there's desire for this type of information outside, so that's another development opportunity for the future. So currently it's not the case, but it's in the pipeline.
And there are, just to touch on, there are other linked data assets that externals can get access to, like the Human Services data set, which includes all of this data plus health, education and others, and similarly a housing and homelessness linked data asset. So get in contact with Jackie or I if that is something of interest. Don, there's a question here about, can you touch on the impact of dropout rates have on the findings, and how do we use what we know about the treatment group to encourage completion? That's a great question.
They're both good questions. Firstly, in terms of the dropout rate, obviously that would have diluted the effect. On the assumption that treatment makes things better, the fact that some people didn't get treatment or didn't complete treatment means that the observed effects are less than they would have been if everybody had completed treatment. I don't know any way of dealing with that problem. You can't start pulling people out of the treatment group. And I will say that if you're an economist, you'd be saying, well, you're paying for the failures as well as the successes. So you really should be doing your assessment on the full measured effect, including people who didn't quite complete the project. But it is frustrating. In terms of how can you encourage a greater completion rate? We're actually looking at that with Justice Health. We have a project designed to try and identify the correlates of people who leave treatment early. And the aim of that is to try and help Justice Health more readily and more quickly to identify people at risk of early departure from the program in order to ensure they get better support or better encouragement to continue. I'm not a clinician, so I don't know what they would do with the information, but they assure me that if they had a better understanding of who is at risk of leaving, they'd be better placed to ensure that more people continue.
Great, thanks, Don. There's also a few comments around reference to housing and homelessness data, and has there been any cross-referencing of risk of homelessness with the drug court participants and the impacts as well with the study questions? So you didn't look at housing and homelessness data, did you, Don?
No, we did consider looking at homelessness as an outcome. Part of the difficulty we encountered, and FACSIAR are alert to this possibility, is it's not entirely clear what you would expect if the drug court was succeeding. I mean, they may stop being homeless and end up in or find themselves in better accommodation, or they may simply stop be living on the street and not reporting themselves as or not being detected as homeless. So in all of these things, you want to be sure the thing you're identifying as a happy outcome is in fact that, and doesn't in fact make things look worse. And you saw that problem or potential problem with the treatment outcomes. Most people before we started that study would have said a reduction in people turning up in emergency department rooms or hospital would be a good outcome. But from the standpoint of some clinicians, what you want to see, and I think Kerry Chant makes this point, what you'd want to see is an increase in engagement with treatment. So these things tend to confound researchers even if they're no problem to practitioners.
Thank you. There's another question here from Graham. In the drug court study, was there any demographics on educational background of those involved in the drug court? Also, as the data derives from the Parramatta court, does this mean that those involved in the study were only from Sydney Metro?
As to the first question, no, we weren't able to match on educational outcomes. No particular reason to think there was a difference between treatment and control on that, but you're quite right. It's a potential source of bias in the outcomes. Quite why less educated or better educated people would end up in the drug court, I'm not sure. What was the second part of the question?
The second part was around whether all the participants were from Sydney Metro because it was based on the Parramatta Court.
Yeah, part of the reason, well, first of all, you can't generalise the results from Parramatta to the other drug courts. I think I'd be wary of that. I don't know whether their procedures are identical or whether their catchment's the same. We looked at the Parramatta Drug Court for the simple reason that it had the biggest volume, and we're already struggling with a sizable enough control group. The other courts have just got started and or have low flows through them. So we really need at least, I would say at least 500 in each group to make for a decent study. Not one of the lopsided situations we found ourselves in with over 1,000 people in treatment and only 300 in control.
Thank you. There's another question here. I'm not quite sure. It says, is there a correlation to economic status, cultural background, etc.?
I don't quite understand the question.
Neither do I. Well, we might, Oliver, if you're happy to just clarify that in the chat. Otherwise, I would like to move to, I think both of those were fantastic presentations about the value as well of looking more broadly than just justice outcomes and starting to bring together insights from linked data. So, Don, what would be next in terms of research priorities or future research in the area that you've just been looking at?
Well, if we know that the drug court's successful in reducing reoffending in general, the obvious next question is what offences is it successful in reducing? And top of that list would have to be domestic assault. It would be really good to see. There's a reason for picking domestic assault, quite apart from its overall importance, and that is that there's a significant contribution to domestic violence coming from drug and alcohol abuse. And if Merit's successful in reducing drug and alcohol abuse, it'd be really nice to know whether or not it's effective in reducing the likelihood of domestic violence. So I've been working with other people from the Justice Department on that. We're hopeful of getting a study up and running, and I really hope we see positive results from that.
Thank you. And Jackie, what do you see as the future uses of the linked data? You're on mute.
I really hope that this data, the linked data, can be used as a kind of call to action to do more for these individuals. So, you know, we can see these families in New South Wales that have very high rates of engagement with our department. Generally, that's not a positive engagement. People often are in touch with our department, not by choice, but by a coercive arrangement. But those connections that they are opportunities for intervention or a therapeutic direction, or, you know, we have a lot of touch points, and hopefully we could harness those touch points to try to change those trajectories that we're currently looking at. So, you know, you can see that some of these families, they are really interacting with our department, you know, monthly or more, but often still having very difficult adulthoods, and that perpetuates a cycle there. So really hoping that it can be a call to action to try to look at those interactions as an opportunity rather than just a marker of future harm, to try to change those outcomes for those families, which are really, you know, the most needy in our community.
Yeah, I agree. I see that we're starting to use linked data to evaluate individual programs across a broader range of outcomes, and I'd love to see agencies coming together to think about what's the collection of services, both mainstream and targeted, that can support individuals and families through the years, particularly for those families that are just receiving or in contact so intensely with services. It's not going to be one individual program that makes a difference forever. It's going to be this ongoing collection of services at the right time that are effective in supporting families.
And I also think, Jess, once you start looking at families and beyond individuals, you can kind of see too that the idea of intervention, there's always an intervention opportunity. There's always a kid who's about to go to school, or a child, a young daughter who's kind of moving into child rearing age, or there's always that. You're always in transition, so really there's an opportunity to intervene continuously, right? Not really waiting for birth, or it's just there's always an opportunity. Someone coming out of custody.
Thank you. Well, there's lots of praise coming through in the chat for both presentations. At the end, we always like to ask our presenters if there's one final thing that you'd like people who have attended today to take away. What would that be? So, Don, I might start with you.
Oh, put your faith in evidence-based policy. What else do you expect me to say?
If you had unlimited research dollars, what would you do?
I'd make sure all the data that's collected by the government is made available to external researchers rather than kept by one organisation to provide to the government. It's all very well to have a resource, but not to fully exploit it is a great pity.
Jackie, final comments from you?
Look, I think just whatever people's work is, they can always be informed by the data, and I think there is a lot of information available. Try to develop that relationship with your data providers. We're available. We're ready for feedback. We're ready to we're here to help. So please avail yourselves of our services. We do better when we know what the questions are that are out in the community, or policy people or frontline people. But don't feel reticent to reach out, because you will definitely receive a response if you write to Jess's agency or my agency. We thrive on those real tangible questions. That's when we do our best. So please build those relationships.
Thank you. Thanks, Jackie. And that's why we hold these research seminars as well, to try and get evidence out there, to try and create those networks and contacts. So by all means, get in touch. And I love one of the comments saying, yes, Don, great. As an NFP social research org, totally agree. Our catch cry is let the data run free. So on that note, thank you all so much for joining us today. Everyone who registered will receive a link to the recording of the webinar in the next week or so. We always put up additional links and materials related to the webinar on the Lunch and Learn website. Again, a huge thank you to Jackie and Don for such terrific presentations. And we would like to invite you to the next Lunch and Learn on the 29th of July, which is titled Supporting Placement Stability for Children in Out-of-Home Care. We really hope to see you there. And for now, thank you all so much. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jess. Thanks, everyone.